Welcome to TESO Consulting Group's DEI podcast series, Why Is It So Hard? Shining Through the Shadow of Resistance. I'm Dr. Tonya Breland.
And I am Erika Leek.
Welcome back. I'm Tonya Breland.
And I'm Erika Leek, and this is our podcast, Why Is It So Hard? Shining Through the Shadows of Resistance. And as many of you know that have joined us before, in our podcast series, we really seek to discuss issues that prevent us from being socially just and free. And the goal is to disrupt the status quo of racial inequality and inequity in systems, those things that are so entrenched that we don't even see them anymore. And so each episode will challenge us to be the change that we want to see. It's not easy to disrupt the status quo in an institutionalized system of oppression and inequality, but we're going to seek to do that. That's really going to be our goal. And so we are at episode 5, part 5 of our DEI Back to School series. And we've been taking a look at different strands of the social justice standards from learningforjustice.org. Wonderful set of resources, and it's been really great conversations around social justice, like what does it look like and how can we achieve it and what things might we consider. So in our final episode, we are talking about action.
Yes, we are. Act now or forever hold your peace. And what we want you to do, though, before we even start this conversation, we want you to send this out to your friends, especially your friends who are educators, whether they're educational leaders or they're actually in the classroom. This episode is also for them. And we would love to hear your feedback. We'd love to hear their feedback as you share in this conversation about action.
Yes.
Act now. You see these commercials like, act now to blah, blah, act now. So here we are talking about acting now, but we're really talking about helping students to be empowered to act.
Yeah.
So let's look at these standards. So like standard 16, for example.
Standard 16 is students will express empathy when people are excluded or mistreated because of their identities and concern when they themselves experience bias.
Yes, yeah.
I
think it's easier for them to be concerned about themselves, but when we teach our students to have that empathy for one another, man, that I think is powerful.
Yeah, and when we talk about disrupting the status quo, right? Like that's a really good start.
Yes.
Because what they start to do is disrupt the previous sort of like, what's the opposite of apathy? They disrupt the previous kind of apathetic culture of apathy and bystanderness, right? They disrupt that by having empathy and showing concern for people who are excluded or mistreated.
Right.
That really is kind of almost at that basic unit. Like I feel something around exclusion.
And what I think is really key here is the word express. So they're not just noticing the the exclusion or the mistreatment of groups of people based on their identity. They are expressing something with it, like this is a problem. They're stating, and they're being empowered to do that because educators are giving them that space to be able to express, I don't like how my friends or my friend who might be autistic, for example, was not included in the kickball tournament, or whatever. I mean, I don't know exactly what it is. I don't like how this person was treated this way, and we've got to do something about it. We cannot allow that. I remember when my son was in 5th grade, we were contacted to come up to the school to surprise him because he was being honored with like a citizenship award. And, he didn't know. He like shows up there. He doesn't know why we're there. And he's like, what's going on? We're in the office. And he's being given this citizenship award because as a student, as a fifth grade student, he was one of the safeties. Remember the safeties that used to wear the safety patrol? I wasn't a part of that when I was a kid. But anyway, he was. But he was the kid that if he saw a child either being mistreated or isolated in some way, he would go over and like spend time with them, talk to them. Like if they were on the playground all alone, he was the one that would go over and hang out with them and play with them. If they were sitting at the lunch table by themselves, he would go and get, like, that was the kind of kid he was as a fifth grade student. And the adults saw that and recognized that in him. And what we need is a school full of, you know, citizens who are able to see that their classmates have been, you know, othered in some way or ostracized in some way, and they feel empowered to do something about it.
I think that is so important, and I think that's so wonderful that he received that recognition because it sends a message that, you know, it matters when you step in. I talk a lot about my experiences as a student, but I can remember saying to a teacher, you know, this person is you know was unfairly treated or they were picked on, and being told to mind my business. Like I can remember that, or I can remember words like tattletale. Like I can remember that. Don't be a tattletale. I can remember, you know, really being sort of rebuffed at the notion of, you know, sticking up for somebody else. You know, this doesn't concern you. Like I can remember that kind of language, and I think when we reward kids and recognize kids that, you know, say like, this person was unfairly treated, and no, I wasn't the one that was unfairly treated, but this person was, and that's not fair, and we need to do something about it. I think we really sort of, you know, create these spaces where other kids see that, you know, it's okay to stick up for your friends, or even stick up for somebody who may not be your friend, but you recognize the mistreatment.
The injustice.
Yes.
Right. You know, as you were talking about the teachers who would say, you know, mind your business, basically, or stop tattling. What's really sad about that is they weren't teaching you empathy. They were teaching you to ignore it.
Yes.
They were teaching you that it wasn't important.
That's right.
They were teaching you that, you know, injustices are going to happen.
That's right.
Just let them be. This is what, you know, this is how society is. Like, what a horrible thing to teach a kid.
I know, but that was part of the, you know,
the culture.
That's part of the culture. You know, if it doesn't concern you,
Mind
go back to your seat. Mind your business, you know? Yes. And
and so now look at our society now, because all the teachers that told the kids to mind their business and sit back down.
And the good students that we are as humans doing just that, unfortunately, you know? But I think really getting kids into a place where they, you know, because it is not natural to feel nothing when someone else is hurting. Like the natural inclination is to want to do something, right? I mean, that's where we get, you know, empathy. I mean, that's a really natural human emotion. And to teach kids like how to act on that, I think is really, when we talk about disrupting the status quo, like that is where it starts.
Yeah.
That's where we're disrupting mistreatment, right? Like it's not okay.
Last year I had the opportunity to visit I was in Memphis, and I had the opportunity to visit the Civil Rights Museum. And while I was there, one of the exhibits showed how young children were who were part of the civil rights movement, and that they were excused from school to go and march, to go and, you know, act, you know, against and basically protest the mistreatment of Black people in that day and time. And it reminds me of like number 17 of this particular standard, that students will recognize their own responsibility to stand up to the exclusion, prejudice, and injustice. And so those children, they were young children, some as young as 10, 11 years old, you know, through teenage years, who were given permission by the adults to be responsible for and to stand up for those people who were being excluded. And in that case, it was them, you know, being prejudiced against, where injustice was happening. Like these students were empowered to not just recognize it, but to stand up and do something about it. And they saw it as a part of their responsibility. And that to me is like the key. That's what I think this standard gets to.
I wholeheartedly agree, right? So there is a quote, I think it's Alice Walker, that we are the change we are the ones we've been waiting for, right? And so that quote says it's our response, it's us, right? It starts with us. And so I think that's really what this gets to. It starts with us. So if you're not gonna, stand up and be responsible for, acting or standing up to prejudice, who else is,
Right.
We are the ones we've been waiting for. And I think that really speaks to what that teaches kids to do.
Yeah. And I think that we have, as educators, have a responsibility to teach children what standing up looks like. What does it mean to stand up against an injustice? And we did have some really good examples of that. A few years ago, after George Floyd was murdered, and there were children in schools, and their educators were actually empowering them because they wanted to march, they wanted to rally against the injustice that they saw with policing and Black people in particular, or Black and brown people, and their teachers were wonderful in empowering them and helping them to use their voice as students and as children. And I think that, that was like a moment in time that was a really powerful moment, because we saw groups of people coming together across racial lines, across ethnic groups, across socioeconomic and even political views, who were joining forces against an injustice based upon what we were seeing happening in our country. And, I feel as though we're kind of moving away from that again. And like we don't have the same kind of momentum that we had. But ultimately, I think that as educators, we have a responsibility to help our students take on the responsibility, because this is part of citizenship. And we have a constitutional right to speak up against, something that we feel might be unfair or unjust with groups of people.
I think that's so, we talked earlier in an offline conversation, and we talked about relevance. And I think this is really a part of the relevance of education. So, when we think about the concepts that we teach kids, it's like, why are we teaching them this concept? Right. And so very often, particularly in spaces, I will say in all the subject areas, there is something unjust happening, right, in these areas. And if we don't create spaces for kids to learn to just stand up for a friend, or maybe somebody who's not a friend, but in my class or in my school, then we never get to the place where they can use the concepts, right, that we're teaching them to help other people. Like they'll never see the connection between what I'm learning to know, what I'm learning to do, and how it might connect to the betterment of my community and even humanity. Like they never get to that place. And so that's why I think that whole piece about recognizing the responsibility, like you have a responsibility to use, the to whom much is given, much is required, right?
Absolutely.
You have the responsibility to use what you've been given. It is required of you,
right?
And I think that's what this really sort of speaks to kids around, and educators as well. Like you have a responsibility to do this. It's not fair to hold these kids up to a standard and you're not doing it on your own. And we see injustice. I don't know about you, but I saw injustice around my students. Had to go to bat for them a few times. Like that's not fair, with this practice or around this group or whatever. And I think that helps us to model what we need to model for the students too.
Absolutely. And it kind of brings us to the next standard, number 18. Students will speak up with courage and respect when they or someone else has been hurt or wronged by a bias. So, it's like we help them to recognize it, and to take on the responsibility, and now they speak up against it. And that speaking up could be in the form of a rally. It could just be that they write a letter. Sometimes letter writing campaigns are really powerful to the powers that be. So maybe it's to the superintendent, maybe it's to the board, maybe it's to the mayor of the town if there's something happening in the town or city where people are living, or to any lawmaker, if you will. But helping students to feel that they have that voice to speak up and that they're going to be heard and valued is really a powerful opportunity and lesson that we can create in the classrooms.
Yeah, I think that's really good because, once it happens in the classroom, so once I see that I have voice, right? And once I learn what it looks like, so what does it look like to speak up with courage and respect, right? So we've seen kids speak out. But, I will say, having taught high schoolers, I've had kids speak out, but the method of the message was like, oh my God, that's so disrespectful. I just felt, it hurt my feelings, as a teacher, as a person. And so how do we teach kids, you can speak up, you can disagree with something, and you can, and you're probably right about the unfairness. But how do we teach kids to sort of navigate so that they're heard? Because once the method is objectionable to whoever they're they can't hear the message, and we want them to be heard. So how do we do this with respect? And I think, how do we do it with courage and respect? And that doesn't mean that you don't, that doesn't mean everything you say has to be taken, that you have to be in agreement with whoever you think is causing this unfairness or this injustice, but we do want to teach them to do it so that they are heard.
Yes.
Right.
And sometimes it's done through, avenues such as, student unions, the affinity groups, where students are given an opportunity to have a voice. And sometimes students will stand up in an officer position, they'll run for office in their school so that they can, be the voice for those in their, their constituency, if you will, i.e. their classmates. And, sometimes student councils are really good for that.
Sometimes. And I think making sure that those student councils and those student governments have the, I don't want to use the word permission, but they have the vehicle to share how students are feeling. So the injustices or the unfairness that they're experiencing or perceiving, I think is really, because sometimes the student council is just well, we want to go on a trip. And it's okay, that's important, right? But are there some other things that you've noticed that you might want to speak to the principal or superintendent or even the mayor about? How can we create these avenues for these student leaders to speak up with courage and respect?
Right. Yeah, no, that's really important. And I think also, having an environment where, this is what's encouraged. So it's you talked about the teacher saying, mind your business, or, this has nothing to do with you. So I don't know why you're making such a big deal about this. That's not uncommon for a teacher to shush a child who sees an injustice or sees something unfair or sees something biased. And, kind of don't get involved with that. That's not your business and whatever. And that approach, unfortunately, does not empower the child, or children to be able to say, what, we don't like what we see, and I think also that homeschool partnership can be really important too, where, parents know, because kids sometimes will come home and tell their parents something.
That's right.
And, they may tell their parents, let me tell you what I saw today, or let me tell you what I noticed, or every time. I remember when I was a principal and I had a long-term sub in a classroom, and the students came to me and they said, this long-term sub is racist, and here's why. And they lay out their story. Now, I had relationship with my students. I was visible. I was in the lunchroom with them. I was on the playground with them. I walked in and out of their classrooms. They saw me in the hallway. They saw me outside when they came to school. They saw me when they were leaving. So I had relationship with the kids. So they felt safe enough as fifth graders, elementary students, to say, hey, Mrs. Breland, we need to talk to you. They came in my office. It was like a small group of them. They're like, we believe this teacher is racist because of X, Y, Z.
Wow.
And it was unfair treatment that they saw happening towards some of the students of color compared to their peers who weren't students of color. And so it prompted me. I didn't shush them. I didn't say, I don't believe that. That's not true. I didn't do any of that. It prompted me to have to investigate what was going on in that classroom. And I confronted the teacher about, what the students were sharing or whatever. In the end, we weren't able to keep that teacher. And I don't remember the very specifics of it, but I do remember that she wasn't there.
Wow.
Too much longer after that. And but the students felt heard.
Yes.
And that's the kind of environment and climate and culture we want to create for students, where if they see an injustice and they come to the adults are now positioned to do something about it.
Right.
So it's not enough for the kids to stand up and the adults, meaning the teachers and the leaders in the building, don't do anything about it.
That's right.
Because you send a message that this is not important, or you send a message that you don't care, or you send a message that this is allowable in our school. And it shouldn't be.
That's right.
So we've got to create an environment that not only empowers kids, but we're going to do something about it.
That's right. They have to have those vehicles, right? That's great. Okay, Mrs. Breland, principal.
Listen, those kids, I was surprised. I did want to oh my goodness, I don't want to have to deal with it. But I was like, these kids came to me in faith, they're trusting that I am going to do something because I have the position to do something. And let me look into this. What's going on here?
I think that speaks to number 19, the next standard. Students will make principled decisions about when and how to take a stand against bias and injustice in their everyday lives, and will do so despite negative peer or group pressure. That was a principled decision that they made, literally, to come to the principal. Like that was a real, because they didn't have to.
They didn't.
I imagine there were some white students as well as, and so, they weren't being adversely affected, by this racist teacher, but for them to come, and that's really awesome.
It was. Yeah. It was really powerful, and it was like, wow. Yeah. But we do have to create that environment.
Yes.
And we have to help kids know, there is a time and an opportunity for you to be able to speak out against injustice when you see that injustice taking place. And if we don't give them those tools, then when they see an injustice in society, they will just continue to allow it to happen.
Yeah, because they won't know what to do.
They won't know what to do.
And
how many teachers do we hear right now say to us when we come in, I don't really know what to do.
I don't know what to say.
Right.
I don't have the language, and I don't know what to do. That's right. That's right. And I think that's really sort of at the crux of these standards.
Right.
We've in previous episodes, we've taken a look at all of these different standards. And so I think it really gets to giving kids the language and the action. It really just provides, this is a toolkit,
right?
Really for action in the area of social justice. So that when they do become teachers or when they do become doctors, they can address health equity, they can address educational equity as an educator, they can address inequity in law and law enforcement. They can do these things because they've gotten the toolkit as kids. And they've been reinforced.
Right.
Their responsibility has been reinforced.
Right. But then you're also creating students who are going to be conscientious in society, and these are the students that are going to be change makers.
Yes.
Because they're not going to be bystanders that stand by and just allow things to happen. I look at what's going on in our country, across the country in different states. And I feel like there are people who want to speak out against what's happening, but they don't feel empowered and they don't know how.
That's
because
right.
they've never been taught how to do that. I was talking to a woman who was sharing with me that she was trying, and this was a white woman, who she was trying to get her son to speak out against some things, and he didn't feel empowered to do that. He believed that some things were not just in society, but in his or in the workplace or whatever. But he didn't feel like he had the wherewithal, the tools, the ability to be able to speak out. And he was also concerned about losing social capital. Like, I don't want people to be against me. And it speaks to how society has created people who are paralyzed by fear of being retaliated against if they speak up against injustice. And it's like, whoa, we've got to help students, number 20, plan and carry out a collective action against bias and injustice in the world, and we'll evaluate what strategies are most effective. So if we can teach children how to plan, we can create a new generation of people speaking out against injustice.
Those elements of education, rigor, relevance, and engagement, it is all there, right? And we think about, it's particularly relevance. How do we make what we teach, the concepts and the skills, how do we make it relevant to, and so when we think about marginalized communities and why they're marginalized or how they're marginalized, and most of us have those communities, those student populations in our classrooms. So what are we educating kids to do? Are we educating them to go back into those systems that victimize and marginalize them and their families? Or are we educating them so that they will have the tools, not just to navigate an oppressive system, but to change it and disrupt it, right? What are we educating them to do? And I think this really speaks to, this speaks to our goal. Like, our goal is to get kids to act. Right? And I think if we don't do that, then why are we here as educators? Like, what is our purpose? What is our role in the maintenance of the status quo?
And if we don't teach children how to act, they will turn into adults who don't act.
That's it. That's right.
They will continue to be bystanders as adults. They will continue to be bystanders, in society, and injustice will continue to happen.
That's right.
That is the whole reason behind, and this is what I really respect about these social justice standards in education. And just to do like a really quick recap, in our last 4 episodes, we really drilled down at looking at identity, and helping students to understand and respect each other's identity. We drilled down and talked about differences and the importance of living in a world of difference and understanding and embracing one another for those differences. Then we talked about, what was the next one? Justice. Goodness, how do I forget that one? Understanding and being able to recognize injustice when we see it.
That's right.
And now we're talking about taking action against injustice.
That's right.
So, we encourage you to really take some time, because what's really good about these, and we actually have them in front of us, what's really good about these social justice standards, they not only walk you through these social justice standards, but they tell you, they break it down by grade level. So, for example, for identity, for a kindergartner, it's like, I know and like who I am, and I can talk about my family and myself and and name some of my group identities. Like, that's when they're 5 years old. But then you take it to the high school level, 9th and 10th grade, when it comes to action, since we're on the action one, for action for a high schooler, I take responsibility for standing up to exclusion, prejudice, and injustice. So these standards will break it down by grade level, and they give you some anti-bias scenarios that potentially could exist in any classroom, in any school. So we encourage you to go to learningforjustice.org and to really read through and investigate and look at how can you embed and integrate these standards into your core standards that you're using for your language and for all your other subjects in school. Because I think that this, if you incorporate this in and embed this in, you can find that you're going to create some really responsible young people and citizens in our society.
I really like that you mentioned like all the courses, because very often we leave it to like maybe the English teacher, maybe the history teacher, the social studies teacher, and the fact that you can use this in any subject I think is very important.
Yes.
This can be integrated in all areas of the curriculum. So this has been a really great conversation. The last four, this and the last three around the social justice standards. We really hope that you are able to use them. You should be able to access them at learningforjustice.org. But we've really enjoyed this conversation and hope that you've taken away some, like a place to start. Share this with your colleagues or even with your PLCs. Because these areas they're not easy, we know, but we know that they're attainable. And we know that we have to do better.
We do.
We have to do better. But let us know how it goes and join the conversation.
Yep.
So again, my name is Erika.
And I'm Tonya, and thank you again for joining us.